The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Colonel Jiang Wei stepped out of the black diplomatic car. His crisp military uniform bore the insignia of the People's Liberation Army, each metal carefully polished to perfection. The Chinese delegation had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic meeting, but Jiang carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed respect was his by right. Standing at attention near the castle's main entrance was Private James Morrison, a member of the Queen's Guard. His red tunic was immaculate, his bearskin hat perfectly positioned, and his rifle held at the precise angle required by centuries of military tradition. At 22 years old, James had been guarding royal residences for 3 years, and he took immense pride in his duty. Jiang approached the entrance with his entourage trailing behind. The colonel's eyes immediately fixed on the young guardsman, and his expression hardened. In his mind, military protocol was universal, and any soldier should recognize his superior rank regardless of nationality. The colonel had spent 30 years climbing the ranks of the Chinese military, serving in conflicts that had earned him recognition and fear in equal measure. As Jiang drew closer, he expected the British soldier to acknowledge his presence with proper military courtesy. The colonel's chest swelled with the authority he believed his uniform commanded. He had dealt with military personnel from dozens of countries, and none had ever failed to show him the respect his rank deserved. This young British soldier, he assumed, would be no different. James remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight, ahead as his training demanded. The Queen's Guard were taught to maintain their position regardless of distractions, tourists, or even minor provocations. His rifle remained steady, his breathing controlled, and his focus unwavering. The castle's security protocols were clear about his duties, and acknowledging foreign military officers was not among them. The colonel stopped directly in front of James, close enough that the guardsman could smell the morning coffee on his breath. Jiang's voice cut through the quiet morning air with military precision. He spoke in heavily accented English, his words carrying the weight of decades of command authority. The demand he made would set in motion a series of events that would ripple through diplomatic channels for months to come. Behind Jiang, his aide-de-camp shifted nervously, sensing the tension building in the morning air. The younger officer had seen his colonel in situations like this before, and he knew that Jiang's pride was not something to be taken lightly. The diplomatic mission they were on was important, but the colonel's personal honor often took precedence over political considerations. Castle security cameras quietly recorded every moment, though none of the participants were aware that their interaction would soon be analyzed by intelligence agencies from multiple countries. The morning that had started as a routine diplomatic visit was about to become something much more significant. Other members of the Chinese delegation began to notice their colonel's delay at the entrance. Some whispered among themselves in Mandarin, wondering what could be taking so long with such a simple matter as entering the castle. They were unaware that their leader's military pride was about to collide with British tradition in a way that would surprise everyone present. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only military protocol, but also the delicate balance of international diplomacy. Two soldiers separated by culture, language, and duty were about to engage in a moment that would define their respective understandings of honor and respect. Colonel Jiang's voice boomed across the castle courtyard as he issued his command. "Soldier, I am Colonel Jiang Wei of the People's Liberation Army. You will salute me immediately." His words carried the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience, and his eyes blazed with the expectation that his order would be followed without question. Private Morrison's training kicked in automatically. Every fiber of his being wanted to maintain protocol, but the situation was unprecedented in his experience. The Queen's Guard manual had covered many scenarios, but being confronted by a foreign military officer demanding recognition was not among them. His superiors had drilled into him the importance of remaining steadfast in his duty, regardless of external pressures. The young guardsman's mind raced through his options while his body remained perfectly still. He could feel the weight of the colonel's stare, the expectant silence of the Chinese delegation, and the growing attention of castle staff who had begun to notice the unusual scene unfolding at the entrance. His grip on his rifle remained steady. But inside, James was calculating the best way to handle this delicate situation. Zhang stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only James could hear. The colonel's experience in psychological warfare was evident as he attempted to intimidate the young soldier. He spoke of military courtesy, international respect, and the consequences of disrespecting a senior officer. His words were carefully chosen to create doubt in the guardsman's mind about his course of action. Behind the colonel, his aide-de-camp began to worry about the scene they were creating. The younger officer had served under Zhang long enough to know that his superior's temper could escalate quickly when his authority was challenged. He also understood that this confrontation was taking place on foreign soil, where different rules and protocols might apply. The diplomatic implications were beginning to concern him. Castle security personnel had begun to take notice of the standoff. Through their earpieces, they communicated quietly with their superiors, describing the situation and requesting guidance. The head of security was faced with a complex problem: how to resolve a confrontation between a foreign military officer and one of the Queen's guards without creating an international incident. James could hear the whispered conversations around him, the shuffling feet of the Chinese delegation, and the subtle sounds of security personnel moving into position. His training had prepared him for many things, but the psychological pressure of being at the center of a diplomatic standoff was testing his resolve in ways he had never imagined possible. The colonel's frustration was becoming more evident with each passing moment. His face had begun to redden and his voice carried a sharper edge as he repeated his demand for recognition. Zhang had built his career on the principle that military hierarchy transcended national boundaries, and this young British soldier's refusal to acknowledge his rank was a direct challenge to everything he believed about military order. Other tourists and visitors to the castle had begun to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by the unusual scene of a Chinese military officer confronting one of the famous red-coated guards. Their phones were discreetly capturing video footage that would later spread across social media, though none of them understood the full significance of what they were witnessing. The morning air grew thick with tension as the standoff continued. Two military traditions were about to clash in a way that would test the boundaries of protocol, respect, and duty. The colonel's next words would determine whether this situation could be resolved quietly or would escalate into something that would require intervention from the highest levels of both governments. The tension reached its breaking point when Private Morrison finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and carried the quiet confidence that came from absolute certainty in his duty. "Sir, with respect, I am on guard duty for Her Majesty. My orders are to maintain my position and follow the protocols established by the British Army. I cannot and will not salute foreign officers while performing this duty." Colonel Zhang's face flushed red with anger and disbelief. In 30 years of military service, no soldier had ever refused his direct command. The young guardsman's polite but firm refusal struck at the very core of Zhang's understanding of military hierarchy. His hands clenched into fists as he struggled to process this unprecedented challenge to his authority. James continued speaking, his training allowing him to remain composed even as he delivered what he knew would be an inflammatory message. "Colonel, I understand your rank and position, but I serve under British military law and tradition. My duty is to the Crown, and that duty does not include acknowledging foreign military officers during ceremonial guard duties. I mean no personal disrespect to you or your service." The explanation only served to further enrage the Chinese colonel. Zhang had expected immediate compliance, not a lecture on British military protocol from someone he viewed as a subordinate. His voice rose to a level that echoed off the castle walls as he declared that military courtesy was universal and that James's refusal was an insult to China itself. The aide-de-camp finally found the courage to approach his superior, speaking quietly in Mandarin as he attempted to defuse the situation. He reminded Zhang that they were guests in a foreign country and that creating a diplomatic incident would not serve their mission well. His words fell on deaf ears as the colonel's pride had taken complete control of his reasoning. Castle security moved closer, their presence becoming more obvious as they prepared for potential escalation. The head of security had been in contact with both British military command and the Foreign Office, seeking guidance on how to handle a situation that had no clear precedent. Everyone involved understood that the wrong move could turn this confrontation into an international crisis. James felt sweat beginning to form under his bearskin hat, but his exterior remained as steady as marble. His fellow guardsmen at other positions around the castle had been alerted to the situation, and he could sense their support even though they remained at their posts. The brotherhood of the Queen's Guard meant that no member stood alone when facing such challenges. The colonel made his final demand, his voice carrying threats about diplomatic consequences and international embarrassment. He told James that his refusal would be reported to the highest levels of both governments, and that the young soldier's career would suffer for his insubordination. Zhang's experience in psychological warfare was evident as he attempted to break the guardsmen's resolve through fear and intimidation. Tourists continued to gather, their phones capturing every moment of the exchange. Social media was already beginning to buzz with videos of the confrontation. Though most viewers had no understanding of the complex military and diplomatic protocols at play, the incident was rapidly becoming a public spectacle rather than a private military matter. James took a deep breath and prepared to deliver his final response to the colonel's demands. His words would either end the confrontation or escalate it to a level that would require intervention from the highest levels of government. The young guardsman understood that his next statement would define not only his own career, but also set a precedent for how British military tradition would respond to foreign pressure. The morning sun continued to climb higher, casting shorter shadows across the cobblestones where two military cultures were locked in a battle of wills that neither side could afford to lose. Private Morrison's response shocked everyone present, including the colonel himself. Instead of backing down or escalating the confrontation, James did something completely unexpected. He shifted his rifle to his left hand with practiced precision, and extended his right hand toward the colonel in an offer of a handshake. His voice carried genuine warmth as he spoke. "Colonel Zhang, I cannot salute you while on duty, but I can offer you my hand as one soldier to another. Your service to your country deserves recognition, and I respect the path that brought you to your current rank. Perhaps we can find common ground in our shared understanding of duty and honor, even if our protocols differ." The colonel stared at the outstretched hand in complete bewilderment. This was not the response he had anticipated or prepared for. Zhang had expected either submission or continued defiance, but this young British soldier had found a third option that acknowledged his rank while maintaining military protocol. The offered handshake represented something the colonel had not encountered before: respect without submission. For several long moments, Zhang remained frozen, his mind struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. His military training had not prepared him for a situation where an enemy showed respect while maintaining their position. The colonel's aide-de-camp watched nervously, knowing that his superior's next action would determine whether this incident became a diplomatic disaster or an unexpected moment of international understanding. James continued holding his hand steady, his eyes meeting the colonel's with genuine sincerity. The young guardsman had realized that the colonel's demand for a salute was driven not by arrogance, but by a deep need for recognition of his life's work. By offering a handshake, James was providing that recognition while staying true to his own duties and traditions. The Chinese delegation watched in stunned silence as their leader faced this unexpected diplomatic solution. Several of the younger officers began to understand the wisdom in the British soldier's approach. Here was a way to resolve the confrontation that would allow both sides to maintain their dignity while respecting their respective military traditions. Castle security. Personnel relaxed slightly as they observed the shift in atmosphere. The head of security, who had been preparing for potential physical intervention, began to see a path forward that might avoid the international incident everyone feared. The situation was far from resolved, but the immediate threat of escalation seemed to be diminishing. Tourists and onlookers held their breath as they watched the drama unfold. Many of them had initially expected to witness a typical changing of the guard ceremony, but instead they were observing a moment of genuine human connection across cultural and military boundaries. Their phones continued recording what was becoming a viral moment of international diplomacy. The colonel's internal struggle was visible on his face as pride battled with pragmatism. Zhang's entire career had been built on the principle of absolute respect for military hierarchy. But this young soldier was offering something different: mutual respect between warriors. The colonel had to decide whether to accept this unprecedented gesture or continue demanding the formal recognition he believed he deserved. James's arm began to ache from holding the handshake position, but his resolve never wavered. He understood that this moment would define not only his own future, but also set an example for how conflicts between military traditions could be resolved through understanding rather than confrontation. The young guardsman was gambling his career on the belief that common humanity could bridge even the widest cultural gaps. The aide-de-camp finally found his voice, speaking quietly to his colonel in Mandarin about the wisdom of accepting the offered gesture. He pointed out that the British soldier was showing respect while maintaining his duties, which demonstrated the kind of principled behavior that true military men could admire. His words seemed to reach Zhang in a way that the earlier confrontation had not. Colonel Zhang's expression slowly began to change as the full implications of the young guardsman's gesture became clear to him. The offer of a handshake was not a rejection of his authority, but rather an acknowledgement of their shared profession and mutual respect as soldiers. After what felt like an eternity, the colonel slowly raised his own hand and grasped James's in a firm handshake that surprised everyone watching. "You are a good soldier," Zhang said quietly, his voice carrying none of the earlier anger. "Your loyalty to your duty reminds me of my own early days in service. I may not agree with your protocols, but I can respect a man who stands firm in his convictions." The colonel's words were translated quickly by his aide-de-camp for the benefit of the Chinese delegation, many of whom nodded in approval at this unexpected resolution. James felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized the crisis had passed. "Thank you, Colonel. Your dedication to your country's service is evident, and I hope our paths cross again under better circumstances. Perhaps you might enjoy learning about the history of the Queen's Guard during your visit." The young soldier's genuine interest in sharing his military heritage showed a maturity that impressed even the most senior members of the Chinese delegation. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but its impact would be felt for much longer. Tourists and onlookers began to applaud spontaneously, recognizing that they had witnessed something special: two military traditions finding common ground through mutual respect rather than confrontation. The videos being shared on social media quickly went viral, but now they showed a positive example of international diplomacy rather than a potential incident. Castle security breathed a collective sigh of relief as the tension dissipated completely. The head of security made a mental note to include this incident in future training scenarios, recognizing that Private Morrison had demonstrated exceptional judgment under pressure. The situation had been resolved without compromising security protocols or creating an international incident. Zhang stepped back and straightened his uniform, his military bearing returning to its professional standard. He turned to address his delegation in Mandarin, explaining that they had witnessed an example of principled military service that deserved recognition. The colonel's ability to adapt his expectations to the situation showed the kind of leadership that had earned him his rank over 3 decades of service. James returned his rifle to its proper position and resumed his ceremonial stance, but not before giving the colonel a respectful nod that acknowledged their shared understanding. The young guardsman had learned valuable lessons about diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible situations. The Chinese aide-de-camp approached James with a business card, speaking in careful English about his colonel's appreciation for the soldier's professionalism. He mentioned that Colonel Zhang would be sharing this story with his own troops as an example of how to handle difficult situations with honor and creativity. The card contained contact information for future cultural exchanges between British and Chinese military units. As the Chinese delegation finally proceeded into the castle for their scheduled diplomatic meetings, the atmosphere had completely transformed from confrontational to respectful. Other members of the Queen's Guard who had observed the incident from their posts gave subtle signs of approval to their colleague, recognizing that he had upheld the honor of their unit while avoiding a potentially serious diplomatic crisis. The morning sun was now high enough to eliminate most of the shadows on the castle courtyard, symbolically representing the clarity that had emerged from what could have been a very dark situation. The incident would be remembered not as a conflict between two military cultures, but as an example of how understanding and respect could bridge even the most challenging cultural gaps. The aftermath of the handshake between Colonel Zhang and Private Morrison extended far beyond the castle walls that morning. Within hours, videos of their encounter had spread across global social media platforms, generating millions of views and thousands of comments from military personnel, diplomats, and civilians around the world. The incident became a case study in cultural bridge building and military diplomacy. British military command was initially concerned about how the incident might be perceived, but as the full context became clear, they recognized that Private Morrison had demonstrated exceptional judgment. His commanding officer personally commended him for finding a solution that maintained British military protocol, while showing appropriate respect for a foreign officer. The incident became part of the official training materials for the Queen's Guard. Colonel Zhang's experience at Windsor Castle had a profound impact on his approach to international military relations. Upon returning to China, he wrote a detailed report that praised the professionalism of British forces and recommended increased cultural exchange programs between the two armies. The colonel began incorporating lessons about cultural sensitivity and creative problem-solving into his own training programs for young Chinese officers. The diplomatic meetings that followed the morning's events proceeded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. The mutual respect demonstrated by both the colonel and the private set a positive tone for the entire Chinese delegation's visit to Britain. Trade agreements were signed, military cooperation protocols were established, and cultural exchange programs were expanded, all influenced by the morning's unexpected demonstration of cross-cultural understanding. James Morrison's career took an unexpected turn following the incident. He was selected for advanced diplomatic training and eventually became one of the British Army's specialists in international military relations. His ability to think quickly and find creative solutions under pressure made him valuable in situations where traditional military protocol needed to be balanced with diplomatic sensitivity. He often told the story of his encounter with Colonel Zhang as an example of how small acts of respect could have far-reaching consequences. Years later, Colonel Zhang and Private Morrison would meet again at an international military conference in Geneva. Both men had been promoted and had incorporated lessons from their first encounter into their respective careers. Their reunion was warm and friendly, with Zhang presenting James with a ceremonial sword from the People's Liberation Army, and James offering the colonel an honorary membership in the Queen's Guard Association. The story of their encounter became legendary within both military organizations, told and retold as an example of how conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than confrontation. Military academies in multiple countries began using their story as a teaching tool for young officers learning about international relations and cultural sensitivity. The viral nature of their handshake also led to increased tourism at Windsor Castle, with many visitors specifically asking to see where the famous encounter had taken place. The castle's tour guides incorporated the story into their presentations as an example of how the Queen's Guard maintained their traditions while adapting to modern diplomatic requirements. Most importantly, the incident demonstrated that military honor and cultural respect were not mutually exclusive concepts. Both Colonel Zhang and Private Morrison had maintained their integrity while finding common ground across cultural and military boundaries. Their story became proof that even in an increasingly divided world, individual acts of respect and understanding could create positive change. The handshake that lasted only seconds continued to generate goodwill between two nations for years to come, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the most significant impact on international relations and human understanding.